Have you ever felt trapped in a relationship that drains your soul, leaving you questioning your own sanity? Welcome to Narcissistic Abuse with Vanessa Reiser, the podcast that shines a light on the dark tactics of abusers and empowers survivors to reclaim their lives. I'm Vanessa Reiser, licensed therapist, author, advocate, and fellow warrior on the path to healing from narcissistic and cult abuse. Joining me for many upcoming episodes is my co-host Dave. We'll unpack each conversation together, diving deeper into narcissistic abuse, cult dynamics, politics, pop culture, and what it all means for real-life healing. Today, we'll hear harrowing stories from survivors, explore the psychology behind these toxic relationships, and share insights and tools to spot red flags, break free, and begin profound healing. This show is for mature audiences and may include upsetting topics like violence. For full content warnings, sources, and resources, check the episode notes. Guest opinions are their own and don't necessarily reflect mine or any affiliated platforms. This podcast is not a substitute for therapy, legal, or medical advice. Today is incredibly powerful and timely. I am deeply honored to welcome one of the most courageous, influential voices in the fight against coercive control, workplace harassment, and silencing mechanisms, Gretchen Carlson. Gretchen changed my life in 2021 when she highlighted my story of my run across New York State in a wedding dress on People, and I am forever grateful. Gretchen is an award-winning broadcast journalist, former co-host of Fox and Friends, and a trailblazing advocate whose 2016 sexual harassment lawsuit against Fox News chairman Roger Ailes became a catalyst for the global Me Too movement. A Stanford honors graduate, Oxford alum, former Miss America 1989, violin prodigy, and New York Times bestselling author of books like Be Fierce and Getting Real, she's been named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in the world. But Gretchen's impact goes far beyond her journalism career. After facing retaliation and systemic silencing, she co-founded the nonprofit Lift Our Voices with Julie Roginski, dedicated to eradicating forced arbitration clauses and non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, that protect abusers and muzzle survivors in the workplace. Through Lift Our Voices, she's championed bipartisan legislation, empowered countless workers to speak out, and fought to create safer, more transparent environments where toxic behavior can no longer hide behind legal gag orders. Her story, from beauty queen to network anchor to fearless whistleblower, has inspired documentaries, films like Bombshell, and millions of people worldwide to reclaim their voices. She's a TED Talk alum, a speaker on resilience and equality, and a true change maker who turns personal pain into collective progress. Gretchen, thank you for your unwavering courage, your heart for survivors, and for joining me today. Your work aligns so deeply with what we discuss here, breaking free from coercive control, naming abuse, and healing in community. I'm grateful and excited for what's ahead. Listeners, buckle up. This is going to be a conversation full of insight, truth, and real hope. Gretchen, welcome. Okay, let's dive right in. I have a bunch of questions that I want to ask you. Many women reflect on abuse in their childhoods and have been victimized early on. How old were you when you first remember learning about abuse or understanding what it means to be coerced?
Yeah, well, it's great to be with you again, Vanessa. I believe it was when I was 22 years old when I actually had a sexual assault experience. And actually, since we're diving right in, I happened to be Miss America at the time, which is a whole nother long story, but you can imagine what kind of role that is as far as how society looks at you. Unfortunately, not as much for your brain as they do just for your exterior, which was something I was trying to fight about my whole year because I wanted people to know that I was also smart and talented. But regardless, I also knew during that year that I had to try and take advantage of the notoriety that I had because I wanted to get into the television industry. And so I did the right thing and I cold called, executives and such to get informative interviews. And so one of those was a high ranking television executive who spent the day with me. And I was like, wow, he's really, he must think I'm intelligent. And he called all these people for me. And then we went to dinner and we were in the back of a town car. And all of a sudden he was on top of me with his tongue down my throat and assaulting me. And when something like that happens to you, as you know, you just panic because you don't really have a plan for it. And somehow I managed to tell the driver to pull over and I got out of the car and I was just a mess. But I was staying with my college friend in New York City at her apartment. I didn't tell her, I didn't tell anyone for 25 years until I wrote my memoir. And even then, I could still feel the shame of, wow, did I do something to, make that all happen? Horribly, just 3 weeks later, a similar situation happened to me yet again in a car. This time I was in Los Angeles with a high ranking public relations executive. And he took my neck in his hand, and I was in the passenger seat of the car, and he was driving. And we were in the parking lot, and he shoved my head into his crotch, and I couldn't breathe. And again, it was just this panic. And I was like, how could this be happening to me again 3 weeks later? I managed to get away. And just to put emphasis on that story, 28 years later, when I was working at Fox News, I was up on our secure floor in our offices, and I saw that man walk by my office. And I went into panic mode again
Wow.
of, what is he doing here? Am I safe? I don't want him to see me. I jumped out of my chair and I slammed my door. And I was like, I was a 10-year-old again, trying to figure out, how am I going to get out of my office safely without him seeing me? And I was like peering out like I was a kid trying to get a cookie out of a cookie jar when I wasn't supposed to. It was just this horrible feeling again of going back and shaking uncontrollably, which is what, assault does to you or any kind of traumatic experience. And it stays with you for a long time. So I think when I wrote my memoir and I talked about both of those issues, it was very liberating for me. And I wish I would have done it, obviously, at a younger age. But both of those were precursors to what I ended up doing at Fox almost 10 years ago now, when I came forward and jumped off the cliff about sexual harassment there. I had experienced, as most women have, multiple times of bad behavior in my life.
Yeah, I think it was Laura Richards recently from Crime Analyst who's prompted that first question that I asked you because she was referencing her own experience as a young child. And that's what happens, I think, to so many young people, not just young girls, but also young boys. I think we have a lot of work to do there in terms of getting them to speak out because we really need men to have our backs in these endeavors. But it made me really reflect upon that feeling that you're referencing, almost like shame washing throughout your body cellularly. It becomes really, is this my value? Why am I being objectified? And especially at a young age. Um, so thank you for sharing that because I know so many people go through that and tuck it away. Maybe it's a family member. Nobody really does much to protect us, kind of a thing, and then carry on.
Mhm.
But I think that is a big part for most of us that we've had that like kind of history of something like this happening, some creepy dude doing some creepy thing at a very young age, and then probably lays the groundwork for us to tolerate other things also.
Yes, yes. And it's all about power, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it's not political. It's not because you wore a red jacket. I mean, it's completely about somebody being able to have power over you in a certain, circumstance. And in my case, those, two sexual assaults were because they know I wanted something from them, right? Like they were incredibly powerful. And here I was just an ingenue I was doing the right thing by being bold and trying to get these meetings. But it was before I had ever entered the workforce. So that was my first entree into like, this is how I'm going to be treated. So I guess you could say I had a really thick skin by the time I got to Fox News all those years later. Still, I wasn't prepared for, the 11 years of hell there, because again, it was the CEO of the company who was my alleged harasser, right? And so I kept, because this is what women do, I kept trying to like beat my head against a brick wall of thinking, well, if I just show him this interview, he'll see how smart I am, and the behavior will stop. And so no matter how smart you are or how confident you are or how well intentioned you are or how strong you are. It has nothing to do with that, because if something or someone holds the power over you, over something you need to survive or you want, as in a job, then all bets are off as far as, it doesn't matter if you're weak or strong. Like, this can happen to anybody.
Sure. I think also too that they will really take exception to a woman who is beautiful, intelligent, and empowered, though. That feels very maybe exciting for them to crack or break,
Yep.
or they feel threatened by it. Because I notice with my clients, a lot of them are in big positions on Wall Street and are dealing with coercive control, even in the banking industry. And they're starting to speak out quite a bit. And they are really powerful, really beautiful, really intelligent. And I think they get really victimized because people in those positions of power are like, let's dance. This is going to be fun. Let me crack you and break you. And so there's a whole other high level game that I think goes on that I know you're aware of, where,
True.
don't be beautiful, smart, and intelligent, because
Yeah.
forget it. This
Yeah.
is going to be a problem for you.
If you're a woman, you can't possibly be all those things together.
Yeah,
But
because then it's a
I totally agree with you. In the beginning of this whole movement, before I came forward, and then when Me Too exploded, I think the sort of cultural norm was to think that this only happened to weak birds, right? You're a wounded bird, and so they come after you. Yeah, that can be true. I know well, I have to say hypothetically, because I can't talk about it, but I know that that's true of predators. But to your point, I think it's probably more of a thrill to try and bring down a woman who has all of those other qualities too.
Yeah, I think you make such a great point too, because I remember when I was going through my own abusive relationship, people would say to me, just don't poke the bear. And I remember reflecting upon his first wife being very different than Vanessa, myself, in that she was extremely like different disposition, very kind, soft, not the badass, go do this crazy stuff, Vanessa. And she had the worst of it. She was tortured for a long time. And so you're right, it really runs the gamut. But I think there can be this idea that if you are empowered as a woman, oof, they get a little nervous with this. Am I going to be exposed? This one's got a big mouth, this kind of stuff. So it really scares them. It can be really frightening. So I also want to know, a lot of things have been going on, current events. We're seeing the Epstein files all over the place. And we're seeing journalism and the First Amendment take a knock. And it feels really uncomfortable to watch for some of us who are advocating. And I know that you do so much work with NDAs and protecting people and making sure that they continue to have a voice. What are you noticing with journalism? What are some things that feel really wonky right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. It's interesting because I straddle both fences. I'm still a journalist, have been for more than 35 years. And also I'm a survivor. So I come at it from both sides. Look, what's happening in our country right now, if I just look at it straight down the middle with no political persuasion whatsoever, it's scary, because I think we've always held the First Amendment near and dear to our hearts, that even if we don't agree with people, they have the right to voice their opinions. And we're starting to see a crackdown on that. I would just point out notably how the president treats female journalists in particular. And it was very triggering for me personally when he called that journalist, because she had the audacity, I'm joking now, she had the audacity to ask about the Epstein files. And that, this was back when he was still calling it a hoax. And I forget if he's still calling it a hoax now or not, but it's definitely not a hoax. It might be a cover up, but it's not a hoax. When she had the audacity to ask about this on Air Force One, he called her Piggy, Piggy. And I have to tell you, Vanessa, that was so triggering to me, because back to when I was Miss America, one of my celebrity judges, unfortunately, wrote a book about his experience the next year and didn't think I should have won. And so throughout the book, he did not call me by my given name. He called me Piggy.
No.
Throughout the whole book. Yes. And the kind of shame that comes with a moniker like that, when you've accomplished something pretty spectacular in your life, and then you come to find out that one of the people that had the ability to put you there or not thought that you were too fat at 105 pounds and called you Miss Piggy. Are you kidding me? And just to show how that shame carries forward, when I was going to meet my now husband on a blind date, this was right before the internet, and I was scared to death he was going to go to the library and see this book and read that somebody called me Piggy. I mean, really, who cares? But this is how shame follows women, especially, right? That you are scarred when somebody puts you down like that, and you shove it all the way deep down into your soul. But when it comes back up, you're like, oh my God, I hope nobody finds out that somebody thought this about me or said this about me. And mine was on such a public stage, and it was so humiliating. So when Trump does this to female journalists, it's very triggering to me. And I find it unbelievable that nobody else says anything. You know, it's a microcosm of the macrocosm of this whole discussion about how do we stop this behavior? Well, you need to speak up. Well, if other people don't speak up for you and defend you, then we're defeating the whole purpose, right? And I know witnesses can also then be penalized and badgered in the same way, but it's almost like we're normalizing this behavior now, so that he says something horrible to a female journalist, and then the next person just goes on with the next question. I mean, that is just unbelievable to me that the Journalists Association doesn't come out and chastise this kind of behavior. So we're in a very difficult time, especially for female journalists. And I think when you have the President of the United States normalizing this kind of behavior, people will write books about this for years on end as to the damage that does not only to the psyche of young women, but especially to the psyche of young men, and what that teaches them is acceptable or not. And that is where I lie awake at night worried. I worry about how this is going to, because you know how long it takes to change culture, right? I mean, we had come so far. And by the way, I still get up every morning fighting, so I'm not giving up. But this is bad. Like this is not good for culture. And to your point before about like the thrill of the power, this whole sort of new movement, the bro culture, you know, it's because I think deep down, women were coming along so far, right? Like we were getting into places that we weren't allowed and we were having a voice and we were making a difference.
Yep.
And now, you know, that's threatening. And so then you have a president that says, hey, it's fine to put women down. It's fine to not acknowledge the women gold medal hockey winners and to laugh about not inviting them to the White House. Yeah, it's just a joke, so we can hide under the joke, right? We all know how this all fits together. And again, to me, this isn't about politics. This is strictly about behavior that is unacceptable. And I fear for the cultural damage that this is doing for years to come.
Yeah, and there's this underbelly in that piggy comment of objectifying this human being, this woman. So unless she fits some ideal in his mind in terms of her body and the way she presents, then she's useless. So it's again that idea of being objectified, that shame of feeling like this is my only value, is that whatever you're seeing it as the aesthetic, I think really kicks up a ton for most of us who are doing all the work on ourselves and getting the degrees and learning the things and becoming emotionally intelligent and trying to raise smart kids and blah, blah, blah. But I think it's that there's an underbelly of your only value is the way you look, sweetheart, this kind of idea. And it's just, it really, when you do that work, it really hits a nerve, that objectifying.
Yeah. And also he denounces women for their intelligence as well. So it's not just how they look. It's, you know, he calls their questions stupid and you're the dumbest reporter I've ever met. You know, we don't need to belabor this other than I think it's incredibly damaging for all the above stated reasons.
Yeah. And a lot of what he's doing, because this is what I specialize in, is just fear projection. Every accusation he makes is a confession of his own ineptness.
I'll leave that to you as the brain behind being able to analyze people. But yes, I would tend to agree with that.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible what he's also gotten away with. So we're becoming desensitized, where I think a lot of us are stunned still, just that this is where we are. It's embarrassing. But I do think that the good news, I know this is a wild thing to say, but I'm sure you'll understand what I mean. The Epstein files coming out does make it a nonpartisan kind of issue, because I think most of us are saying this isn't really a Democrat or Republican issue. This seems to be a global issue.
Yep.
We're really interested in getting the truth. We want to protect survivors and victims. So that feels like a little bit of a godsend. It's becoming less of this polarization and more, okay, we should all agree. Let's see some justice here.
It's a great point. I have been doing tons of interviews on this. And I always say, before somebody decides to harass or assault you, they don't ask you what political party you're in. Because again, it's all about power. Same is true with what you just said. I think that the most important point, however, is we would not be having this conversation right now, nor would both sides of the aisle be coming together on this if it were not for the survivors. And for the basic fact that the American public now in 2026, as opposed to when I came forward in 2016, they believe them. They believe them, they honor them, they want the truth, they want them to get justice. The change, this is why I do get up every morning and continue my work, because the change that has happened in this global Me Too movement with the understanding that women don't make this crap up, but they're actually telling the truth. The idea that in a short period of time, speaking of cultural change, that the majority of Americans want justice here and the majority of Americans believe these women, that's huge. That is huge. And I think we need to look at the positives of this and realize that without the courage of these survivors, who, by the way, have been battling this since the early 2000s and before, and nobody gave a crap about them, the fact that they've hung on this long and have continued to speak their truth is so important to honor them, because we would not be here without them. And I think we need to hang on to the positivity of how our culture, even with all the other stuff we just talked about, the majority of people want the truth, they want justice, and they believe them. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, and I think what we're noticing too is that there seems to be more of there's a better outcome when you see people in numbers for some reason. So if the lone wolf goes out there and goes, I've been abused, everyone's okay. But we're seeing a bunch of people coming forward. And I think that's really going to help matters. The only time I really see justice, unfortunately, I know there are going to be outliers, is when there's numbers in the cults, like the Nexium cult, the Stolen Youth cult, both happened in New York. There were people as a collective that came out and said, this was my abuser. And so hopefully that helps to get some more momentum, because I noticed that happens to be the truth. Unfortunately, in my practice, a lot of people come out and say, I've been abused, and they don't see justice. So a lot of people who are suffering in silence are watching this and hoping that there will be justice in this case so they can see some kind of justice.
Yeah. I mean, and if you go back to when I came forward, I was all by myself, jumped off the cliff. But then inexplicably, the parent company of Fox News decided that they were going to start an investigation. And that was news to us. My lawyers never expected them to do that. But in the process, what ended up happening was that then they started interviewing a bunch of other women at Fox. And then they found a lot of those women called me and said, I'm so scared. I only told 5% of the truth. Guess what? 5% of the truth was enough. Roger Ailes was fired in 2 weeks, and the whole place was turned upside down, with a bunch of other people falling down as a result of that, like Bill O'Reilly and others. And it was because of this contingency and this idea that it wasn't just me. Somebody had to step forward first. But yes, power in numbers. The thing, though, that I think we still need to work on, and this is what I do every day at my nonprofit, Lift Our Voices, is that we still are battling people being silenced on a daily basis through non-disclosure agreements. And that is keeping people from having the ability to even say anything. And that is a huge battle that I try and take on every single day. And I pass laws to try and change this with regard to sexual misconduct, because if something bad has happened to you and you can't talk about it, there's no recourse. And that the mental health of that is extraordinary. And so, I'm working really, really hard to make sure that when people go into the workplace, they don't have to sign those kind of agreements anymore if something bad happens to them. And that's been a long journey for me over the last 10 years, but I've been able to pass 2 federal laws and a couple state laws, along with other advocates, to make sure that people do own their own voice. This is a long, arduous process, but it's incredibly important to make sure that people are not silenced through NDAs.
This is so important. And I want to spend some time on this with you because I know this is your wheelhouse. And I feel so connected to this concept because you and I have talked through email a little bit about my own personal experience. What I was dealing with was something similar. It was civil restraints, right? So it was not an NDA, but it's almost like NDA's little brother. And it looks really good on paper because it basically says, you don't talk about him, he doesn't talk about you, everybody's happy. What happens with abusive people, though, is that if they hear a whisper that you said anything ever, because some of them are very litigious, you find yourself in the family court system on repeat. I'm talking about ad nauseum because this is a playground, the family court system for abusers. And so all of this to say, this idea of me not having a voice was the single most horrifying experience of my entire life, period. And it was subsequently lifted. And I think about that every day as having won the lottery, as having freed myself from a prison. And so the work that you're doing, I feel so connected to because this idea of being an advocate and doing my run or speaking out as much as I can around these issues, if we don't have that, if we don't have beacons like yourself and others that are sounding off about this idea of having a voice, to me, this is the greatest horror. And that circles back to this First Amendment concept, but you really can't imagine what it's like to be the most disempowering thing is to have no voice, period. I just don't even know how else to describe it. And so tell me how this felt for you and where you are now with the NDA work that you're doing with Lift Our Voices.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you have your voice back. I mean, the irony is I don't own my own voice still. That's the
I know, I
irony.
think about that sometimes.
It's why I get up every morning to make sure millions of other Americans will in the future. I mean, that's why I've dedicated my life to my work at Lift Our Voices. There's been a movie, Bombshell, made about my experience at Fox News. There's been a mini series, The Loudest Voice, on Showtime about my experience. You know, I had these wonderful actresses play me, Nicole Kidman and Naomi Watts. I mean, I'm so glad they agreed to do these roles because it helped expand our mission, right? And they would have never done these movies 10 years ago, ever. Not meaning the actresses, but the Hollywood landscape would have never paid attention to this. So I'm very grateful to them for that. But I couldn't consult on these movies. I can't tell you if the portrayals of me in them are accurate or not, because I am also still bound by an incredibly stringent NDA about what happened to me at Fox News. You know, people are always startled to find out that I don't own my own voice. And I may never, because in the workplace world, when you reach some sort of a settlement, you know, NDAs are just commonplace, which is what I fight against now. And I can't tell you how many thousands of people have reached out to me saying, you know, I signed an NDA because I was just in a fog when all this was happening and my mental health was deteriorating. And when do I get my voice back? And I say, never, if you sign that damn thing. And it's not their fault. They were in a mental fog. And here's the other problem. Lawyers advocate for NDAs because they think that's the only way they're going to get money. We've done research at Lift Our Voices to show that in states where you can't use NDAs anymore, which are New Jersey, California, and Washington state, and we've introduced legislation in New York and Connecticut now as well, in those states, we did research to show there's been no change in the ability to get a settlement, even when the survivor gets to own her or his own voice. Because the reality is that most people aren't going to exercise that to go public with their story. Why? Because we still live in a culture where you'll be penalized. You'll lose your job. I'm also trying to change the culture, but changing the laws is actually easier than changing the culture. And that's saying a lot because it's really hard to pass a law. But it's showing that you give the power back to the survivor or the victim to know that they own their own voice, even if they don't exercise it. It's just the knowledge that they own their own voice. And the amazing thing is I don't, but that has not precluded me from doing this work because I get great satisfaction in the idea that by passing laws that force companies to not silence you anymore, that I'm helping millions of people that I will never meet. I'm helping my children, and I'm hoping for their generation as they soon enter the workforce that that this will be different for them as a result of my work. So anyway, people can learn more at liftourvoices.org. Obviously, I'm very passionate about this, but the two laws happened in 2022. The NDA one is called the Speak Out Act. And that means that if you suffer any kind of sexual misconduct in the workplace and you signed an NDA when you first came into the job, which 1/3 of all Americans do, huge number, not knowing what it entails, if you sign something like that and you face sexual misconduct, you do not have to abide by that NDA. It's huge. The other law is something even more disconcerting because people don't know what it is. It's called a forced arbitration clause. 84% of all Americans have signed these at work. It's scary. It's the majority of us, meaning that we can't go to court if something bad happens to us. We have to go to arbitration. And the reason that's bad is because it's secret, because the company usually arranges it. They have a lot of repeat cases. If you can imagine a big company, this is your only shot. They pay for the arbitrator. The arbitrator comes back for repeat business. They usually find in favor of the company. It's a rigged system. And then you go through this process, you don't win. You had the courage to come forward and you get fired. And now you have forced arbitration and a slapped with an NDA and you can't tell anyone what happened to you. And you go off into the wilderness. And our research shows that the majority of those people never work in their chosen career ever again.
They get blacklisted.
Blacklisted. But even if they don't tell anyone, because now let's say you work 25 years in an industry and you try to go get a new job and they say, well, why did you leave such and such? You can't say anything. So it makes you look sketchy. It makes you look unreliable. So this is why people, usually women and people of color, are dropping off. And we have no way of knowing how many people have been affected by this, but we know it's a ton because there are a ton of these kinds of discrimination cases and sexual harassment cases all across America every single day, right? So this is what I'm fighting against, is to stop putting these into secret chambers and allowing companies to be able to say, we don't have any dirty laundry. Well, the reason it looks like that is because it's all going to secrecy, right? And we've been fooling the American public into thinking that we've come so much farther along with these issues than we actually have, because it makes it look like the company doesn't have any discrimination cases or sexual harassment. The thing is, they're all going to secrecy. They're still happening, folks. Trust me, they are, because I talk to these people all the time. So my first law got rid of forced arbitration for sexual misconduct. It was the biggest labor law change in the last 100 years. People now are getting justice because they're having the ability to file a lawsuit and actually go to court. So this is what I fight against on a daily basis. It's a big hurdle. My organization, Lift Our Voices, is the only one doing this in the country, but I really believe it's the silver bullet to equity, because if a company silences you on bad behavior, guess what else they're silencing you on pay, they're silencing you on promoting you adequately. It's sort of just the environment and the way of life, and it's not transparent. So I'm trying to get to transparency and equality and voice for all American workers.
Yeah. And we see, I think it's 1 out of 4 CEOs is a psychopath directly or something like that in terms of clinically. So what you're going to notice is in these environments where you're talking about the bigger companies, this sort of good old boys club is the norm, and it's been forever. So they're going to want you to be quiet, and they're going to want to do things, be abusive and be coercive. And we see this in the family court system in terms of silencing also, because it's happening in a vacuum. You're disallowed from going out and talking about it. No one's allowed to come into that environment. We're starting to see more court watchers, which is good. So you can babysit this experience, and judges are starting to be held more accountable and being outed for, making bad calls on custody issues. But to your point, this idea of having a voice and having transparency is really important for women, people of color, anybody who's disenfranchised, anybody who's not in that good old boys club. That idea of having a voice is so important. So the work that you're doing on this macro scale, I see the micro of it all on a daily. But the idea of not having a voice, I think, is the hardest thing for victims.
Yeah, it's crucial. And to your point, you brought up a really good point. The buck stops at the top of these companies, right? And if you have a bad actor at the top, that filters down. They tend to hire people like them, right? They tend to exhibit their behavior in little sort of ways at the beginning to see what they can get away with. And then it becomes normalized. So before you know it, the entire environment inside of a workplace is toxic, but people think it's normal because so many people are partaking in it. It's kind of like a kid, takes a cookie out of cookie jar. They get away with one, so the next time they take two. And that's eventually what happens inside of these companies. So I always, in a positive spin, I always say to CEOs, you have the ability to change this. You have the ability to set the tone because the buck stops with you. And imagine if you operated a company by gathering everyone together and saying, that is not going to happen as long as I'm in charge. We're going to honor people who come forward and use their voice and have the courage to say something bad happened to them. And we're not going to throw them into silence, and we're not going to penalize them. We're going to actually do an independent investigation, and we're going to give them a fair shot. And if they're telling the truth, the bad apple is going to leave and this worker gets to stay. Now imagine, it sounds so simple when I say that, but that is not what's happening in our culture today, especially now. And that's what I'm promoting to happen. And that's why I talk to a lot of CEOs, because they have the power to make this very simple change. It's not that tough. You might have to air out your dirty laundry for a little while, take some of it under the chin. Yeah, we've had some bad experiences at our place. Okay. But if you move into a transparent mode moving forward and you approach this with fairness, then you're going to get rid of the bad people. They're going to face consequences. The behavior will likely stop. So you accomplish two things at the same time. You keep good workers who have the courage to come forward, and you get rid of the bad behavior.
Yeah. It reminds me of certain scenarios with like P. Diddy, where there's this coercive control. People are afraid, right? So like, let's say the CEO is a bad actor. People are not going to want to go up against that person. And they're all being enabling in those environments. And because for fear of their own job, life, who knows what. But yes, you see a lot of silence. People are going to just play along. Um, but that kind of brings me to my final question, which is really interesting how this landed, because I worked for the phone company. I climbed telephone poles in White Plains, New York for 8 years. I worked for Verizon, and most people think that's really funny, but I was in a very strong union and I loved that job. My father did that job for 25 years up until he passed away. And I call this the phone company question. My agent and I came up with this, but most people find that really funny or interesting about me because they don't know that this person that climbed telephone poles when I was young. What is something about you that people don't know that people might find interesting, unique, anything at all that you could share?
I appreciate that. My life has worked in really mysterious ways. I mean, we kicked off this conversation by me saying I was Miss America. What? And I was a really serious violinist as a child, which is how I got there, because half your points are based on talent. I've thought about this story a lot in the work that I do now and how I finally built up the courage to come forward. When I was 5 years old in a small town in Minnesota, I went to school on the first day, and the teacher divided us into two groups, those who could read and those who could not. And she put me in the group of those who could not, even though I knew how to read. So I went up to her desk 3 times that day. And I still know her name. I said, but Mrs. Grossline, I know how to read. And she said, oh, yeah, Gretchen, just go back down and sit down. And I was upset about this. I went running home to my mom after school and said, Mom, I know how to read. They put me in the wrong group. And she called the school and everything was ironed out. But the reason I share that story is because at 5, I knew in my heart and my soul and my gut that I had to stand up for myself. I knew that it was important to tell the truth. 3 times I was told to go back and sit down and just follow the leader, right? Now imagine if I hadn't done that. That could have affected my entire educational trajectory, but my life trajectory. I thought about that little girl a lot before I came forward and jumped off the cliff at Fox News, because I knew in my heart that I knew how to do it. I had done it. And there are other examples in my life. And for your listeners and viewers, I know how hard it is. I mean, even at my age now, my heart still pounds before I'm going to do something like that, right? I mean, all of us get that same reaction. But I share that story because I think it's really important to put that kind of determination in our young people. Some of it's innate, but I think it's really important to let people know that to always stand up for themselves and to always speak their voice, and that's the right thing to do. And so I think about that little 5-year-old girl often.
Yeah, that is a great point. I think for anyone who's listening, people ask me even about the run I did. What a crazy thing to do. And it was insane, but it was really something that I tell people all the time. Do the crazy thing, do the bold thing, do the thing that, is unique. Teach your children to draw outside the lines, not fall in line and be a sheep and follow, blindly, and sort of ask the questions and push back. I know with my son too, like there's been times where I've been stressed out, and he'll push back, Mom, I'm not your therapist. And I go, oh, that's good. I did a good job. You're not going to take any crap from me. So this is important to also cultivate in our young people. So thank you for that. It's really, really important that people, advocate and push and take the risk and do the thing. So thank you so much. Well, I really appreciate you always taking the time to be with me and chat with me. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing. It's so important. And I'm glad that, people are going to be affected by this in a positive way. You want to share what you're working on now, where people can find you, things like this?
Yeah, so liftourvoices.org is my nonprofit, and would love if you'd visit the site and find out more about what we're doing. GretchenCarlson.com. Also, I do a lot of different TV appearances and, talk about these issues all the time. So yeah, check it out, and please learn more about what you're signing before you start a job. It's really, really important for your own voice.
Amen. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Gretchen.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
Thank you for joining us today on Narcissistic Abuse with Vanessa Reiser. If this episode resonated with you, or if you recognize any of these patterns in your own life or someone you care about, know that you are not alone and healing is possible. If you found value in this conversation, please take a moment to like, subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps us reach more survivors who need to hear these messages. For exclusive bonus content, deeper discussions with Dave and me, and ways to support the show, join us on Patreon or follow along on Instagram or YouTube at Vanessa Reiser LCSW. Until next time, keep choosing yourself, setting boundaries, and walking toward the light. And remember, healing is a radical rebellion, and your peace is the revolution. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.